All right, Math 2, this is Mr. Trutna with Clovis High School. We're going to go over Worksheet 10.3. We're going to go over numbers 1 through 10. Here is the worksheet that you should have out. So follow along with this. Hopefully you've already done the problems. You're going to be checking the answers as I go through them. Okay, if you haven't done them because you didn't understand how to do the problems, then go ahead and you should be writing down as I write down. All right, so in numbers 1 through 6, we're just going to be using the graphs below, and we're going to be identifying the apparent zeros of the function. So what we're looking for is, we're looking for the zeros. So we want to identify the zeros of the function. Okay, so what are the zeros? Well, the zeros, if we're looking at a graph, are going to be the place or places. There could be 2. There could be 1, or there could be none at all, of how many places my parabola intersects or touches the x-axis at. So you could see my parabola intersects the x-axis at right here, which is -2. It intersects the x-axis right here, which is at +3. Here's my x-axis. So in number 1, the zeros are -2 and 3. Okay, and that's all that we're doing. We're just looking at the graph, seeing where the graph intersects or touches the x-axis. As you can see in number 2, it appears to me that this parabola only touches the x-axis at one spot. A little bit hard to tell here. I'm going to say that's at -3. So in this one, in number 2, I would say the zero is, okay, and I'm going to just have -3. So you could have just one zero. In number 3, even though the parabola is going downwards continuously, you could see that it intersects the x-axis right here at +3. It intersects the x-axis here at 1, 2, 3, -5. So my zeros are -5 and +3. Okay? -5 and +3. Remember, when we write the zeros, you never want to write them in parentheses separated by a comma. It's probably best to separate them by the word and. Okay? In number 4, we have a 0 right here, which is at -1. We have another 0 right here, which is at +4. So that means my zeros in number 4 are going to be -1 and 4. Once again, separate the zeros by the word and. Don't separate them by a comma. The reason why you don't want to do a comma is because if you put the answer like this, some people would misinterpret that as an ordered pair, especially if you put it in parentheses. Do not do that. All right, number 5, what are the zeros? Well, we have a 0 right here. My parabola intersects the x-axis at -5. We have another 0 right here where my parabola intercepts the x-axis at +1. So my zeros are going to be -5 and +1. All right, last one, number 6. So I only have one 0. It's right there at +2. All right, so I have a 0 in this problem, and it's at +2. Okay, so that's what we're doing. Okay, so now when we get to number 7 through 10, we're finding the zeros of the following quadratic functions, but now we're going to do it algebraically. So if you notice, 7, 8, 9, and 10, there's no graph. So we want to find the zeros by doing it algebraically. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing that we do is, if we're finding the zeros algebraically and we're given a trinomial like we are actually in all 3 of these problems, the first thing we do is we factor the trinomial. So a trinomial always factors into 2 binomials. This is a minus trinomial, so that means my factors are going to be x plus and x minus. Okay, to figure out what values, I'm going to put numerical values where each of these 2 spots are here. So what I do is I go to my last number, my C value, which is +6, and I'm going to write down all the pairs of numbers that multiply to make +6. Okay, there they are. And then one of those pairs is going to be my answer. It's going to be the pair that could be added or subtracted together to make this middle number right here, which is -1. All right, so it's going to be 3 and 2. Now, since it's plus minus, my question is, that I have to work out is it going to be +3 minus 2, Or is it going to be the opposite of that, plus 2 minus 3? Well, that's a negative, so that's a negative 1. So it has to be plus 2 minus 3 because that's equal to negative 1. So my factors are x plus 2 and x minus 3. Okay? So now, how do I find my zeros? So what I do to find my zeros is I take each one of my factors, x plus 2, I make it equal to 0 because I'm finding my zeros, and I take my other factor, x minus 3, and I make it equal to 0. And I solve each of those. So here I would subtract 2 from each side, so I would get x is equal to negative 2. Over here, I would add 3 to each side, so I would get x is equal to negative 3. So what are my zeros? My zeros are negative 2 and positive 3 for number 7. Moving on to number 8, I have y equals negative x squared minus 2x plus 15. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to get rid of that negative sign by multiplying it by the back end by negative 1. Okay, so that creates a new trinomial for me, and I'll switch colors up so it might be easier to see. So my new trinomial becomes x squared minus 2x, then instead of plus 15 it's going to be minus 15. Okay, now I factor this trinomial. So this is a minus minus trinomial, so I know my factors are going to be x plus, x minus. Alright, to figure out what numbers go in my factors, I take my last number, my c value, which is 15, and I write down all the pairs of numbers that multiply to make 15. That wasn't that hard. Which one of those pairs can be added or subtracted together to make negative 2? Well, it's 5 and 3, or 3 and 5. Which one is it? Well, since it's negative 2, we have to have a plus 3, and we have to have a minus 5. Why is that? Because plus 3 minus 5 is equal to negative 2. So there are my factors, okay? So my trinomial factors into this, but I'm not done, because now I have to divide each of these numbers by negative 1, because remember I multiplied by negative 1 at the beginning. So really my factors are x minus 3 and x plus 5, okay? So now how do I find my zeros? Well, once I have my factors, what I do to find my zeros is I take each one of my factors and I make them equal to 0. That's going to find my zeros. Okay? So, solving this out, I add 3 to both sides. That gives me x equals positive 3. That's a 0. Solving this equation out by subtracting 5 from each side, I get x is equal to negative 5. So, my zeros are positive 3 and negative 5. And you can write it like this if you want to. X equals 3 and x equals negative 5. Number 9, g of x. Don't worry about the fact that we have this function notation, g of x. It's the same thing as y, which is the same thing as f of x, okay? X squared plus 6x plus 9. So to find my zeros, algebraically, I have to factor the trinomial. This is a plus plus trinomial, so my factors will be x plus and x plus. Now, to figure out what numerical values go in my factors, I take my last number, my c value, which is 9. The pairs of numbers that multiplied make 9 are 1 and 9 and 3 and 3. And then one of those pairs is going to add or subtract together to make positive 6. So it's 3 and 3. So I get x plus 3, x plus 3. Okay, now those are not my zeros. Remember, I'm finding my zeros. So what I do now is I take each one of my factors and I set them equal to 0. Now, since my factors are the same, I only have to do it once. So I solve this by subtracting 3 from both sides, and I get x is equal to negative 3. There is my 0. There's only one of them in this case. You don't have to write down the same thing twice. Alright, the last problem here, number 10, p squared, g of p. Don't worry about that notation. That just means y is equal to p squared plus 3p minus 4. So the first thing that I do is I factor my trinomial. Okay, so this is a plus minus trinomial. So what does a plus minus trinomial factor into? It factors into p plus, p minus. Now I need to find out what numerical values are my factors in my binomials. So I take my C value, which is 4. Don't worry about the negative 4, just 4. The pairs of numbers that multiply to make 4 are 1 and 4 and 2 and 2. Which one of those pairs can be added or subtracted together to make positive 3? Well, it's 1 and 4. So now the question is it going to be plus 1 minus 4, or is it going to be the opposite, plus 4 minus 1? That's a positive 3, so it has to be plus 4 minus 1. Now, to find my zeros, what I do is I take each one of my factors, p plus 4, I set it equal to 0. I take my other factor, p minus 1, set it equal to 0. To find the zeros, it literally means set the problem equal to 0. Okay? So to solve this, I subtract 4 from each side. So one of my zeros is p equals negative 4. To solve this equation, I add 1 to each side. So my other zero is p is equal to 1. So there are my zeros, negative 4 and positive 1. Okay, so come to class if you still have questions on this, or I'll see you before school, at lunch, or after school.